Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Babies in Common show yet again. I'm Jeanette.
And I'm Melissa. Welcome, listeners. Please note that any information shared during the show is not to be taken as medical advice. Please consult your own care providers for questions about you or your baby's health and visit babiesincommon.com/disclaimer to read more.
Awesome. And today we are talking about placental encapsulation. Our guest today is Michaela Shaw, the woman behind Ostara Birthwork and Botanicals. Michaela is a full spectrum doula serving families in central and eastern Massachusetts as well as Rhode Island. And maybe in a minute, Michaela, you can explain to everybody what a full spectrum doula is. And Michaela is also a graduate of the Holistic Herbalism Program at Blue Ridge School of Herbal Medicine in Asheville, North Carolina. There are so many cool things down there. And has studied permaculture and sustainable cultivation practices throughout Central America and the US. And she's a practicing herbalist.
Yes, she completed her first hands-on training in placenta processing and encapsulation in 2019, and then went on to complete placenta encapsulation specialist training with the International Postpartum and Placenta Association. And that will be the focus of our interview with her today. She is currently rooting just outside of Worcester, Massachusetts. Placenta encapsulation is a form of placentophagy. I'm going to mess that word up at some point today. Also known as placentophagia, which is the act of consuming part or all of the afterbirth following birth. And believe it or not, this behavior is characteristic of the birth giver in the majority of placental mammals. Exceptions to this generally include humans and aquatic species like whales and dolphins, as well as camels, who typically do not consume their placentas after birth. However, the use of placenta preparations can be traced back to historical and traditional practices in Western and Asian medicine, but not necessarily as an individual postpartum remedy for the birth giver. So while one could certainly consume the placenta in a variety of ways, we will not be talking about placenta smoothies today, I promise.
No recipes, really?
No recipes. We will be discussing placenta encapsulation, which entails the process of washing the placenta, steaming or slicing it raw, dehydrating and grinding it, and then encapsulating the powder produced into consumable capsules.
Yes, and proponents of this say that the placenta is full of valuable nutrients such as vitamins, minerals, hormones, and iron, and that cycling this nutrition back into the body can help restore balance and support the birth giver in their recovery and even in the transition to parenthood. They assert that placental consumption can potentially boost your milk supply, which there are lactation consultants in my community that disagree. We could talk about that. Some people say they improve your mood, and I've known lots of people who would agree with that. Decrease your chance of postpartum depression or the baby blues, and also increase your iron supply. On the flip side, critics say evidence for positive effects of human placentophagy is anecdotal and limited to self-reported surveys, and there is no scientific evidence of any clinical benefit of placentophagy amongst humans, and any anecdotal benefits are simply the placebo effect. But again, sometimes placebos are fine too, as long as the thing you're doing isn't hurting you. So we'll discuss that. So now they're all technically correct, though, about the lack of evidence, but that goes both ways because there simply haven't been any big studies on this practice. So there's a lack of evidence, period.
Exactly. In addition, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, issued a warning in 2017 against placenta consumption due to a case in Oregon in which a term newborn infant developed late onset recurrent neonatal group B streptococcus sepsis, which is a blood infection, after the mother ingested contaminated placenta capsules containing the streptococcus bacteria. It should be noted that this mother did actually screen negative for GBS on a vaginal and rectal swab at 37 weeks of pregnancy, but the pills were tested and did show contamination, showing that screening for GBS in pregnancy certainly has its limitations. Because of this case study, the CDC recommended against the intake of placenta capsules due to inadequate eradication of infectious pathogens during the encapsulation process, and especially cautioned that in cases of maternal GBS colonization, chorioamnionitis, which is an infection of basically the bag of waters, or early onset neonatal GBS infection, that ingestion of capsules containing contaminated placenta could heighten maternal GBS intestinal and skin colonization, thereby increasing an infant's risk for late onset neonatal GBS infection, which, to clarify, late onset infection is a neonatal infection with onset from day 7 of birth to day 89 after birth.
Ooh, that's a long time.
Mhm.
So, however, despite these warnings, and I think, it's always interesting, even with my public health background, to look at things that are forbidden after one case.
Right.
Fascinates me. So, but families just continue to encapsulate placentas, and encapsulators continue to argue that the benefits outweigh any potential risks. And here at Babies in Common, as always, Melissa and I have always advocated for families' right to informed decision making. So we're happy to have Michaela on our show to talk about this topic and give us some of her thoughts related to this hotly debated topic. So after that long intro, hello, Michaela.
Hi, thank you so much for having me and for that intro.
Yeah, so I want more intro. So tell me more about you. So you're an herbalist and a doula. How did you kind of put those two together, or was it separate? How did you become interested in placental encapsulation? Because it's also, it's a process to do in a kitchen. So it's a commitment, I would say.
It's a commitment. Yeah. Yeah, I would also say. Um, yeah, a little bit more about me. I am an herbalist, doula, and placenta encapsulator, and all of those things really kind of have become woven together pretty beautifully in the last few years. I just moved back here to Massachusetts last year, actually, coincidentally, just as COVID was striking. Um, I grew up here, but I was living in North Carolina, and that's where I have been doing all of my studying and learning and living um, about herbalism and doula work in the last several years. And during most of my time there, I was living with a midwife, actually,
Oh,
my landmates that owned land down there. And I got to live on this beautiful property in a little valley in a town called Barnardsville outside of Asheville, North Carolina. And that is where I did my doula training as well. Um, but I was living with a midwife, and she was the one to first plant the seed of interest about placentas and placenta encapsulation, because she did it for her clients that were interested.
was she a home birth midwife?
She was a home birth midwife.
Okay.
Yes. And so I never really got to see her. I never observed her doing the process or encapsulating or dehydrating the whole process, but she did plant that seed. And so then when I went through my doula training a bit later, I did that through a wonderful doula collective in Asheville called Homegrown Families down there. And they had a few doulas that also offered placenta encapsulation as an add-on to their doula services. And I was able to learn through one of the doulas there, through kind of like hands-on learning, kind of an apprentice style learning through some of the doulas there. Yeah, and so I just thought it was a really beautiful thing to add in, to offer as a doula. Um, I think what I immediately loved about placenta encapsulation was the way that it can bring an added emphasis to that period postpartum, to the importance of caring for the birthing person in that
Yes.
postpartum period, and that like really tender postpartum period when that's often lacking for a lot of different reasons. But I just think placenta encapsulation is one really beautiful thing to add in, that just says, your body is amazing and recovering and so deserving of care and nourishment and reverence, really.
Mm.
I
And
agree.
some of the packaging is also very pretty, I've seen.
On placenta
Yeah.
capsules. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like to add in, as an herbalist too, I'll add in some added like placenta, or well, the placenta capsules, and then some added herbal goodness too for nourishing the postpartum parent, maybe like a sitz bath, or
Mm.
like a soothing spray, a soothing herbal spray, and I'd like to add in there maybe some flowers, something to
Mm.
brighten that immediate postpartum.
Mm.
I love that
Yeah,
you say that, it's something to do to bring reverence to that time and to honor the birth giver, because that's definitely something that was part of human culture all over the world for thousands of years and is very, very absent in a modern American culture. So I think that's, a beautiful thing to even think about. In any way that you do that, show reverence to the birth giver, the body, and pamper the birth giver. Any way you can do that is special. And so I love that.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about just briefly, what you mean by full spectrum doula? We haven't had a full spectrum doula, I think, on our show talking about that yet.
Yeah, absolutely. So I originally trained as a birth doula during my time in Asheville, and more recently am going through the training as a full spectrum doula. So what that means really is that as a doula, I offer support in the full spectrum of reproductive health options. So not just for somebody that is pregnant and giving birth to the baby for themselves and for their own family, but perhaps somebody that experiences loss or miscarriage, or somebody that chooses abortion, or somebody that is moving through a fertility journey, a fertility struggle, or a family that's looking to adopt. So kind of the full spectrum of what moving through reproductive health cycles could look like for people. Full spectrum doulas kind of touch on all the possibilities.
That's awesome. That's definitely something I feel like I've been hearing more about over the last couple of years. It, is becoming more and more people are going through trainings like that, which I think is great as someone who cares a lot about, reproductive health and things like that, but also as someone who went through an infertility journey and, any way that, and even as a high risk nurse, I've taken care of families who knew they were going to lose the baby after birth, like for something like trisomy 18. And so having extra training as a doula to support any outcome of pregnancy, whether that be a healthy full-term live baby or a miscarriage or a baby that will not survive or even an abortion, families need support around all of that. Infertility, I feel like infertility doulas should be a thing because, that you need support going through that. It is a roller coaster that you want to desperately get off, so thank you for sharing that. Now to kind of jump back into the placenta side of things. So placenta encapsulation, my understanding is that there are two main ways to prep the placenta for encapsulation, a steamed prep and a raw prep. Is this accurate? And if not, why? If so, what are the pros and cons of each method?
Yes, that is accurate. Those are the two methods that I offer, and the only two that I'm aware of right now. And their names kind of give away the bulk of it, I suppose. But the steamed method means that you are steaming the placenta before slicing it and dehydrating it. Whereas with the raw method, there is no steaming step. So you are slicing the placenta raw and putting it on the dehydrator. The result, like the what is produced is the same, appears the same. It's placenta powder by the end, right? So to be clear, in the raw method, it is in no way wet or truly raw as the end result, but it's the preparation. And there's different philosophy behind both methods. The steamed method is also known as the traditional method, sometimes referred to that way. And that is in reference to its roots in traditional Chinese medicine, which I think is a big pro of that method, that it has such deep roots in a medicinal lineage that is literally millennia old, right? So to be clear, I'm not a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. The truth is that there is not a lot of anthropological evidence of humans consuming their placenta. There's a lot of rich tradition around ritual with and showing reverence to the placenta in different ways, but not necessarily consuming, traditional Chinese medicine being the main one that I know about and the oldest that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
So are proponents of raw versus steamed, or, saying that maybe my guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that, it won't break down any vitamins or things like that? Or is it just because they want to process it minimally? Does steaming kill any bacteria? Because that gets us kind of to our second question, which is, is it safe, right? So
So to go back, yes, I believe that the raw method is founded in the philosophy that kind of like the raw foods movement, that in heating it less, in processing it less, that it retains more nutrient content, more hormonal content that's then bioavailable to the body after. That is not research backed as of yet. That would be another great thing. I would love to see researched. My understanding is that the difference between nutrient content and hormonal content, we don't have enough research backing that yet between the steamed or the raw method, but that is the philosophy behind the raw method, and I think why a lot of people choose it. For your second question, the ensuring whether it's safe, perhaps the reason that people choose the steaming method, yes. But to clarify, like I said, other than the steaming or not steaming, the method in preparation around both methods, both the raw and steamed otherwise, are the same in sanitation protocol and preparation, and in the dehydration process. For both the raw and the steamed, when they're put into the dehydrator, they are first heated at the highest temperature at food safe temperatures to ensure the elimination of any bacteria. So that's done for both methods. So they are entirely heated at high food safe temperatures and end up in the same completely dry, free of moisture powder, essentially placenta powder is how they both end up. But yeah, it might be somebody's choice to steam it for that additional extra heating process. But because of heating it at that high temperature at first, both are considered safe for food consumption.
I wonder if there's any information in that CDC case study where they actually talked to the placenta encapsulator and found out what they did.
Well, that's actually what I was going to say is, they said that the pills were contaminated. And so it could have been that they weren't processed correctly, or it could have been that they were somehow contaminated after processing. I mean, if you're handling food or placentas, if you're going to consume something, you have to make sure that you don't, put the cooked chicken breast from the grill back on the plate that had the raw chicken breast on it. Right. So I think that I'm glad we have case studies when things are serious and so out of the norm, right? Because sometimes a case study can lead us down a trail where we find some serious problems, right? But one case is one case, and kind of, a little off tangent, but that same issue with the CDC recommending that people wash and sterilize their bottle parts after every single time they pump instead of putting them in the refrigerator, because there was one case of bottle parts that got contaminated because the parent was washing them not in a separate bowl, but with a contaminated sponge and a contaminated sink. Is like, okay, yes, let's look at that case study. Let's definitely, I'm a scientist, by just
training.
By training. And I want to take these concerns seriously. But if it possibly could have been people get food poisoning at restaurants.
You don't shut them all down.
Exactly. You don't say nobody can have a restaurant.
That's so true. Yeah, there is so much to unpack from that one case. And like you said, I would love to know exactly how the encapsulator encapsulated and did what they did. But I think that's a really good point. We can ensure that placenta encapsulation is safe for consumption the same way we do food. So it it feels like a crude example, but I think of beef jerky.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Um, not the same, not the same.
Not the same.
And if you're just listening, Michaela's face was so perfect right there. The curiosity factor in your grimace.
Yeah, not the same, right? Like not deserving of the same reverence. Well, you know what though?
Well, the cow might disagree with you, Michaela.
The cow is, I take it back. The cow deserves reverence.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cow totally deserves reverence. You know, maybe the final product, I don't know, I'm a vegetarian. I can't like
No, but I hear you. My dad makes beef
Yeah.
jerky, and there's a
Oh.
process for it. And,
Uh-huh.
you know, people
Right.
can, you know, beef can be contaminated, certainly.
Right,
And
it
so,
can be safe if
right.
and only if you know strict safety protocols are followed, and there's a few, and there's some in that particular case study that we know were not followed that we can point to very clearly, and there's a lot of question marks.
Sure.
You know, so a big one in that particular case being that there really needs to be a clear understanding and respect for the cases in which placenta encapsulation is contraindicated, is not appropriate.
Mm.
A major one being that if the birther or baby shows signs of infection at the birth, during labor, or immediately following, it is not appropriate to encapsulate or consume the placenta. And in that case, we know that happened. And so it should have been recommended by the encapsulator that they were not consumed,
Mm-hmm.
that it was not encapsulated at all. So that's a big thing on that one particular case. You know, there's a few other scenarios in which consuming it would be contraindicated, and your encapsulator would have to say it's not appropriate for you to consume it, right? There might be other options, but there are a couple of other scenarios. You know, if the placenta was sent to pathology in the hospital, also contraindicated to encapsulate at that point. If it's not stored properly, again, coming back to like food safety protocols, if it's not stored safely on ice, refrigerated properly between birth and encapsulation, also contraindicated at that point. So a lot of these things we just don't know happened correctly in that one
case.
Mm-hmm.
But so how do parents figure out who is a reputable placenta encapsulator?
That's a great question.
This is not regulated, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is there a certification, or is there a database of people? I imagine there's multiple places where you can learn it. You can go through an organization or two organizations like you did, or you can learn it from a colleague and start doing it, right? So tell us more about that.
Yeah, that is such a great question because it is not regulated. Actually, like all of my passions and my work and my learning, herbalism, doula work, placenta encapsulation, none of them are like federally regulated or have a clear path for licensure or certification at this point. So it is a little tricky just to ask somebody what their, you know, qualifications are and feel confident about who you're going with. Training is a good thing to look at for sure, right? Like, where did you train? When did you train? And you can look up whether you feel like, you know, that organization is reputable. And I would argue that that's a little tricky because, again, as somebody where all of my learning and work and passion projects kind of lie outside the boundaries of something that is regulated in that way, and because I do really feel like there's big worth in apprentice style learning of any craft, right? So, and that's hard. I can't put that on my website.
Right.
But it doesn't mean it doesn't have value or like, you know, isn't really effective in training someone correctly. For example, like my placenta training, right? So I did go through more of like formal training, we'll call it, through IPPA, and I did really like that training. I thought it was really comprehensive and I learned a lot. And I would argue that my apprentice style learning that was hands-on, that wasn't through a company or any organization that I could point to, was a, a learning process that taught me better. IPPA, I hope you're not listening.
No, but I hear what you're saying. And I think that interviewing whoever you're going to hire, whether it's a doula or an herbalist or a OBGYN, midwife, or a placenta encapsulator is important. And I think asking questions about safety would be prudent, as like I said, somebody who is a nursing professional who cares about science and safety. I would recommend that, ask some questions like, how do you treat the placenta to make sure that it's not has any bacteria in it? Are there any contraindications to placenta consumption that I should be aware of? And, how do you make sure that the placenta is not contaminated when processing? I think those are 3 great questions to ask. And the answers that you gave, I know are to me seem really good answers. Like, we heat to food safe levels. Don't eat your placenta if it was treated with formaldehyde and pathology, or you had an infection, and, et cetera, et cetera. But if someone, I would say if someone was like, oh, there's no reason anybody can consume a placenta and you're not going to get sick from your own placenta. That's just like not rational, right? Like you can get sick from anything can be contaminated. So to me, that would be a red flag. So, I agree with what you're saying. Like, look at their background, look at their training, ask some questions about it. Don't rule anybody out specifically though, because, they don't have some type of special certification, because there's benefits to apprenticeship learning, but also, I would recommend asking questions about safety and handling as I would for any consumable product.
Yeah.
I just wanted to interject too. I find it fascinating. Like, we were talking recently, Melissa and I, with an OB, and he was saying that there was no evidence for placental ingestion, right? And that was not the major conversation that we were having. It was an aside. But, and I hear from IBCLCs that, it'll occasionally comes up on these Facebook groups that I'm in of other IBCLCs, and they'll be like, no, it's bad. Like, it'll lower milk supply. And oh my gosh, did she use the placenta? Oh, tell her to stop taking her placenta. And I'm like, wait, you can't have it both ways. That a placenta doesn't do anything. There's no evidence for it. And then, oh, it lowers milk supply, It's like, does it do something or does it not? And I remember hearing, I don't know, I can't tell you where I saw it, but I remember hearing somebody saying that there was a research study at one point, and they looked into how much of a certain hormone could you find in placenta pills, and they couldn't find any. Like, there was no negligible amount of iron in there either, I want to say they said, and I was like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm just telling you that people that take it, especially if they didn't take it with a few previous pregnancies, are saying that they felt a lot better. So if it's not making anybody sick, this isn't a bad thing. And sure, if I had somebody who had a low milk supply and they were taking their placenta, you know what? I don't know. Like, let's take that piece out of it and see what happens.
Well, I'll be honest. I
took
Claritin, which is an antihistamine, a pretty mild one, not as powerful and drying as Sudafed or Benadryl. But I took Claritin with after my third pregnancy, because I was dying of allergies, and I had no problems. I had an oversupply with my first 2, and I noticed a considerable tanking in my milk supply after my third. It could have been other things, yes, but I just stopped taking the Claritin for a couple of days. My milk supply came back up, and I was like, okay, I don't need to take that. So I think it's, again, I think if you are otherwise should be making plenty of milk, because everything seems to be going well, especially if you've made milk before. This is your first pregnancy, you're taking placenta pills, and you notice that you feel when you start taking them a decrease in your supply, then I don't think it's a bad thing to maybe stop taking them for a couple of days and see if it comes back up. And if it's no different, then, to me, it doesn't seem strong enough to make a blanket statement about, don't, that's just how to me, I'm just a very rational person, like logical, rational, so, but I agree. You can't have it both ways. You can't say it does nothing and then that it's the cause of all your problems.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would even say, like, that's a good thing to kind of feel out. when you are interviewing placenta encapsulators. If somebody's telling you it's this magical solution and you'll only have great milk supply and it will only guarantee that you don't experience the baby blues, you know, that's a big red flag. Speak confidently about it for sure in the benefits, because to touch on there not being evidence, I would just argue that no evidence and no double-blind scientific research are two different things, right?
Right.
Anecdotal evidence has big value, and a lot of women and birthing people have had really good, positive outcomes consuming placenta capsules, and that's a value. Anecdotal evidence is evidence, and of value, and for sure I would love some more like double-blind studies and research, and I love that. I'm all about that. And
Ooh, who could fund that? Come on,
Yeah, right.
raise your hand.
there's sort of a reason, you know, that the vitamin made by you is not getting a ton of research backing. There's not a ton of money.
Well, exactly. People, you know, that's the other thing too, is when people say there's no evidence, I hear that there's no evidence for, I used to hear this all the time. There's no evidence that delayed cord clamping does anything. There's no evidence that skin to skin is helpful for term babies, I would hear, which is, I wanted to scream, because yes, there was a lot of, some of the evidence that first started coming to mainstream medical journals about skin to skin was what they called kangaroo care, specifically for the care of very fragile premature NICU babies, because that's where, I mean, NICU babies bring in a lot of money. And so figuring out how to lower, you know, medical costs and make, you know, and help, it had backing from a lot of places like the March of Dimes, et cetera, et cetera. So they found that, wow, when you put these very sick, fragile, premature babies on the parent's chest, it actually like increased their oxygen saturation and decreased their apnea episodes and like all of this stuff, right? So they're like, this is where we're getting this research. And then you'd have doctors saying, well, there's no evidence that the skin to skin actually helps with term babies. It's like, okay, you're right. They haven't done any major, huge clinical trials yet with skin to skin, but also this is something that people have been doing since the beginning of time, and also just kind of makes sense that it's at least just nice.
Are there studies published recently that show that when it's 70 degrees out, it's still healthy to wear clothing?
Right. It's like, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying, you know, I want everybody to jump right into the next magic thing that someone claims is going to cure all ails. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, when medically minded medical model of care, medical practitioners say there's no evidence for that. Like Michaela said, anecdotal evidence is evidence. Is it the highest level of evidence? No, but that is what we have right now for something like perineal massage and consuming your placenta encapsulated. You know, like there's not huge NIH funding for touching people's vulvas. I wish there was, but there's not. So like what
That's the quote of the day. I love that.
What evidence we have? Yes. Is it double blind, controlled trials?
Placebo
No,
controlled,
it's not. Right. But that we do have some evidence that either perineal massage is helpful or does nothing. So don't say there's no evidence. And even if there was no evidence means no evidence. It doesn't mean no benefit. It means we don't know yet. We don't know yet on big, large scale scientific trials if this is more helpful than not. But we do have at least some evidence. And again, I'm in the interest of full disclosure, I actually didn't encapsulate any of my placentas. I just didn't want to. So I'm not like trying to convince anybody to do it. I just get really angry when medical professionals like try to claim that no evidence is somehow evidence of harm. It's maddening.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
but I digress.
right.
So
Michaela, you were going to say something else.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was just going to say, definitely not for everybody, right?
Right.
Like your choice. Shocking, you know, as a doula and an herbalist and a placenta encapsulator, I'm incredibly pro-informed choice. You know, it's what drives really, I think, all of my work. and so as much information as we have on it either way, and then in the end you make that choice, right, for you and your body and your family and your postpartum time. And also I just wanted to go back and lift up, it was mentioned earlier, the placebo effect, right?
Mhm.
There is research and evidence of all kinds on the placebo effect,
Right.
and it being a really powerful effect, it being effective.
Yes.
Like and great if the placebo effect allows you to have a healthier, happier, easier postpartum, fantastic. I'm
Yeah.
all
What's the downside?
Yeah.
I'm all
I
about
mean,
that.
cost, right? That would be a,
Right.
if cost was an issue for you, but otherwise, like the placebo effect doesn't have a downside. Like there's
Mm.
not a risk to the placebo effect.
Right. If it's having absolutely no effect in your body, but the power of your mind is allowing it to have a measurable effect on your body, then yeah,
Then
that works
awesome.
for me.
Mhm.
Yeah, not bad. Yeah, totally.
So if an expectant person is planning to give birth at a hospital, can they still encapsulate their placenta? Because, most people that I've met that do encapsulate their placentas are having home births. And we could talk about why that might be the case. I think it's kind of a self-selecting population of people
Yeah.
that might be more off the grid and, holistically focused and whatnot. But I used to work at a hospital in Cambridge that had a lot of midwives, and people would take their placentas home for a variety of reasons, excuse me. And to encapsulate would be one, but it's not as straightforward in a hospital environment as it is with your home environment. So what types of roadblocks do expecting couples need to be aware of regarding potential hospital policies for releasing placentas, and how can they work around that if they're planning a hospital birth and are interested in taking their placenta home for whatever reason?
Yeah, great question. So I think this does differ, can differ a lot state to state. Here in Massachusetts, it is the right of the birthing person to request their placenta. And each hospital will have like a release waiver for you to sign. I provide my clients with one that they can take with them, that should allow them to choose to take it. But each hospital, to be honest, I've encountered pretty different experiences with it, hospital to hospital, even here in Massachusetts. So some are really kind of accommodating and aware that this is a big growing preference and they're coming up against it more and more. And it seems like they kind of have their own procedures down, and they're helpful and others not so much. So that is important to talk with your placenta encapsulator about beforehand. You do want to be prepared for storing your placenta properly. So some hospitals will help you do that by storing it in a designated fridge. Some won't. So I always prepare my clients by telling them, no matter what, be prepared and bring your own cooler with you. And the ice, the hospital definitely has you covered on, endless amounts of ice at the hospital. You do have to make sure that your placenta is properly cooled and stored continuously until your encapsulator comes to get it. So that's really important. And that kind of can differ hospital to hospital, sometimes even kind of staff to staff.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
If you get an older nurse that has never heard of placenta encapsulation, they're going to be like, what? You want to take your placenta home and eat it? You're going to make a placenta smoothie? That's always the thing. And then they're going to say, I don't even know where the release form is. I don't even know where I would get something like that. And so definitely bring a release form if you're placenta encapsulated.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, like just
Yeah,
bring it.
I send them with a release form. I send them with their cooler, and I always recommend that they talk to their care provider beforehand. Have a very clear conversation about, I wish to encapsulate my placenta. I'm gonna take it with me, or I want my placenta, whatever it's for. If it's not encapsulation specifically, I'm taking that thing with me, and that's a good conversation to have beforehand, just so you can kind of see how they react expect and maybe be as prepared as you need to be. But hopefully your encapsulator, that's something that would be discussed with them beforehand so you feel like prepared.
A few years ago, I heard there was one local hospital to us that was requiring a burial permission from the town you lived in. Even if you weren't planning on burying it, which we'll get to, but that's one of the things people might do with the placenta. Have you heard that recently?
I haven't encountered that, to be honest. No.
Yeah, good. Maybe they stopped because it was kind of crazy.
Yeah, I know I haven't encountered that.
Good. Okay, so my question is, we know that they can ingest it around the time of birth, but then I also have met people who said that they're saving part of it for later on. And like, how old can you do this? Do you have to make them all? Because I've heard the answer to this question from at least one placental encapsulator. I want to hear what you say. I have one in my freezer that's 17 years old. Can we?
Oh my
save
God, it's amazing.
it?
It's yours?
It is.
Gosh, awesome. Oh my gosh, I would love to know more about that sometime.
She couldn't part with it.
Yes, I love that. Wait, what was the question? I got so distracted. How long after?
Well, how long are people are using it? I've heard from menopause. Like, explain a little bit more about, like, if you're not going to take it immediately in the first, the first 2 weeks after, like, how long do people take it postpartum, and then what else would they use it for in the future?
The pills, meaning how long? Like,
Yes.
is there? I've also heard some people say, I'm going to save some of my pills for later in life. Is there? What scenarios would you consider saving some of your pills for? Do you think that's a good idea or not? What do you say?
So yes and no, right? So your placenta capsules, I recommend taking immediately postpartum. And as far as storing them, they come in a glass jar, and you want to store them in a cool, dark place, and not your refrigerator though. That can cause moisture. So a cool, dark place like a cabinet, your medicine cabinet, or your pantry, or your bedside table. I tell people they can store it that way and take their capsules up to 6 weeks. Beyond that, you'd want to freeze them. There are no added preservatives in your placenta capsules, so they're safe to store that way up to 6 weeks. After that, you would double bag them and put them in your freezer. These are your capsules.
Mm-hmm.
So you keep them in your freezer. And from there, I do recommend, if people have them left over that way, they're nice to implement when your cycle returns, for example, when you start your period again. That's a really nice way to implement some capsules. But really, I recommend taking your capsules until you're finished through your postpartum. What I do offer is a placenta tincture. So a tincture, if anyone's not familiar, is an extract in alcohol. So what I do is I put a piece of the placenta in alcohol, in the highest proof alcohol possible, and that extracts out all the benefits of the placenta, and I give that back to you after the extraction process is done in a dropper bottle, and that preserves it in a way that allows for longevity. And so that you can save also in a cool, dark place for a lot longer. And that's what I recommend people use to get the benefits out of their placenta longer term when their cycles return or menopause. You hear a lot about people wanting those benefits for those hormonal shifts and that big life transition. That is obviously for most people years and years down the road. So the tincture is better in that case, in my opinion.
Are there people who are taking other people's tinctures?
Oh. Other people's placenta tincture?
Yeah.
Maybe.
I would say, if anyone listening has done that, get in touch. I'm curious.
Yeah, I would say take your own.
Right. But if you don't have your own.
But if you don't have your own, yeah. If you don't have your own, I wonder. I haven't heard of that.
Because my 17-year-old placenta is not good enough. That's why.
Right. You're right.
Yes,
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah,
old.
let me know if you experiment.
I've been told that would not be within the realm of food safety, and therefore I should not do that.
That's right. The placenta itself, that's right. The tincture,
Right. If I had a tincture, right,
right.
you could take that. Yes.
The frozen placenta, no, I cannot recommend that.
Yeah. But there's other cool things you can do with them. So what else can you do?
What else can
Yeah.
you do to honor a placenta instead of having it disposed of as medical waste? Because a lot of people, I work labor and delivery, they would say, I'd say, do you want to take your placenta home? Which most nurses will not ask. So first of all, if your nurse is asking that, you know that they're cool with you bringing your placenta home. They're going to help you jump through the hoops. But say, you plan to do anything with your placenta, and they're like, no. Why? Well, why? What do people do with it? And then I might explain some things. And then they say, well, oh, I didn't think about it. Well, what are you going to do with it otherwise? I was like, we're going to incinerate it. And they'd be like, oh, no. Because that's what happens to medical waste. It gets incinerated, right?
Yeah.
And so, which is fine. Like, so many people just dispose of their placenta, and that is fine. But that's what happens. But it's funny because people who have never thought about it before, had no preconceived plan to do anything special with their placenta, have no spirituality or culture around the placenta. When they hear that it's going to be incinerated, they often are like, "Well, wait a second, that is special." Because there's something pretty cool, even if you're not like a birth geek like us. There's something pretty cool about the fact that your body has made an entire organ that looks literally like a tree of life to support and grow a human in your body. And then your body just like gets rid of it. Like you make a placenta every time. That's crazy cool.
The coolest. The coolest, right? I think that's the coolest. Yeah.
What might people do with a placenta otherwise?
Yeah. Well, one option, it does look like a tree of life. I don't think it will ever get old for me staring into a placenta. It looks somewhere between a tree of life and like the deepest galaxy.
True.
Mm-hmm.
And so one cool thing that you can do is a placenta print to try to capture that. Using watercolor paper, you can kind of lay out the placenta on the side where the umbilical cord is coming out, and it looks like that tree of life. And you can use the watercolor paper to create like a print of that tree of life side of the placenta. And it, the magnificence is slightly lost, I would say. It's a little bit different than how incredible it looks like in person, but it does kind of preserve that and is a cool keepsake. I think I offer that for my clients as part of
there was a dad in one of my childbirth classes years ago who was a funny, he'd like to be funny. We all like to be funny, right? But he goes, I was explaining that this is one of the things you could do with your placenta, and he's like, dude, we could totally make placenta prints all around the nursery like a design.
Like wallpaper.
Yeah, he's like, we could put it up like there and then over there,
Oh, like in paint, like different colors.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to see that. I'm gonna Google that after.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
so that's one thing. You could also, if you have the ability to dehydrate it, you could take the umbilical cord and create a keepsake from just that. So I also offer that for my clients. And some of them are so long, you can actually like create a word with your umbilical cord. Love is my go-to. Or create it in like kind of a spiral. And I've seen people do various kind of neat things with that, like, preserve it in like a resin.
You can make jewelry out of it.
Jewelry, yeah, you can make
in that resin. Yeah.
The tie that bonds, right? That umbilical cord is also pretty powerful stuff. So I've seen people do cool things with that piece specifically. All of these things, you also just have to be keeping in mind that you have to do everything in a sanitary way.
Sure, definitely.
Safe way. So you have to be able to fully dehydrate that umbilical cord, like really dry. You can't like air dry that thing. But if you have a dehydrator, you can do some neat stuff with that and create a keepsake. So those are a couple. I've seen a lot of different things. Honestly, it's kind of fun to Google what different people do with them. But those are, as far as keepsakes, a couple options that I offer and are pretty easy to do at home if you're not looking to encapsulate or you can't for whatever reason, but you really want something to remember your placenta by. And then there are lots of rituals. Like I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of rich history from around the world of really beautiful rituals using the placenta and the meaning behind these rituals. One being that you mentioned, burying the placenta. And that shows up in a couple different cultures around the world, honestly. And again, the kind of the meaning behind it varies a little, but I've seen people bury their placentas, plant a tree over it, or plant of significance to your family or to your culture. I think is really beautiful, and some of the things that are said of that are that it encourages your child to always come back home. It ties them to that
so
piece
nice.
of land. So beautiful. I think that's so sweet.
Mm-hmm.
And also that it connects them into that homeland. So it kind of ties them into that piece of earth, right?
Mm-hmm. Is it true you have to bury it 6 feet under?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would definitely look into how to bury it properly because you don't want anything digging it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. You don't want the cat to bring your placenta back home
It
afterwards.
just seems like 6 feet is very deep. Like, would 3 not do it?
Right. Yeah,
Mm.
and that's right. I may be looking up the actual appropriate depth, but you definitely don't want anything cat or otherwise bringing that back to you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I've seen online some placenta encapsulators will offer to make a healing salve or balm that can be used on like the perineum or cesarean scar or other skin woes by collecting the cord blood, which of course has stem cells in it. Now, there's no, again, research on this, but
that
that's
makes me
something.
think that there's something to that, though, right? I mean,
yeah, who knows?
theoretically.
I mean, they use foreskins from circumcisions in
right.
cosmetic products. So
Right,
this is
face creams. Yeah.
right. That is actually the truth. I'm not just a conspiracy
It's on
theorist.
Oprah. They discussed it on Oprah.
They also use foreskin from circumcisions to do skin grafts for people who have diabetic foot ulcers. So again, that's another thing.
A good use. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, these stem cells in cord blood are pretty amazing. Two other things that you might not think of is just simply taking a picture of the placenta so you can look at it later, because after you've given birth, you might not really be thinking about that. But I always offer that as a birth assistant or a labor nurse, to take a picture of the placenta, just because it is something that, if you're not taking home, will get discarded, but it is a really cool, amazing thing that your body made that nourished and grew your baby. So that's pretty cool. One of my friends actually donated her placenta to a local professor at a college near her. Probably couldn't do this in a high school because of, I'm sure, somebody getting upset with potential bloodborne pathogens, even though, there's OSHA standards for things like that. But this professor wanted to show it to his biology students. And I think that's pretty cool. They happen to be chemistry professors at that school and offered it to the biology professor. So think outside the box. I mean, I think that anything like this, that just helps, like you said in the beginning, Michaela, to bring it all back around, the reverence for your body, for the postpartum time, for the miracle of life. These are just things that oftentimes it's like, well, all that matters is the baby, right? At the baby getting out, and I think that there's a lot to be said for just reminding yourself and your family. Something that I did with my placenta was I saved it until my kids got older and I showed it to them before we actually ended up burying it. So this is what helped grow you in my body. This is what a placenta is. Talking about placental
wasn't
mammals.
Wasn't it my story of showing my child my 6.5-year-old placenta at the time, the one that inspired you to do that?
Yes, it was.
Yes, and then we refroze it, which is why it's still there. But yeah, that was amazing. Right? To have your kids be like, "What? I was in there?" How cool is that? So.
And again, my mother always teases me, like, the things that your kids are going to say to their teachers are going to horrify. My mom showed me my placenta, but listen, that's just the cross that they bear. Okay. I am their mother.
I love that.
Any
Oh my
last,
gosh.
just thoughts about placenta encapsulation, Michaela?
Oh man, I think we covered a lot. Yeah, I would say placenta encapsulation again, just to kind of bring it full circle. That is what I really love about it. That emphasis on the importance of care in the postpartum time. And if placenta encapsulation is just not right for you, you can do that in a lot of ways, creating like a meal train. So people bring you warm, hearty, nourishing foods that drop it at your doorstep, or whatever it may be. I'm all about placenta encapsulation. I love that. Add it into your postpartum time, add it into your registry, so people can give you the gift of your placenta back to you in your registry, or for a loved one. That's awesome. But if it's totally not for you, something that brings that added care to your postpartum time.
That's a great point. Oh, so many great ideas. Well, I hope some people are going to use this podcast to have a conversation with their partner and their care provider and think of some creative things to do. Thank you so much for coming on our show. And if anybody wants to learn more about Michaela and her services, her birthwork, botanicals, and placenta services, herbalism, and all of that, it's ostaracare.com, OSTARA care.com. Her website also includes some additional reading and resources on this topic, so you can always start there.
Yes. And we hope you have all enjoyed today's show. And we hope you will tune in again. Remember, Babies in Common is a community for you. After all, we all have babies in common. Thank you, Michaela.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
Awesome.